Eric, this episode today, we basically have Martin Luther, nailing his proclamations on the door because we have this dude, Dr. Ben House, PhD, Mr. Dr. Ben House, I believe is what he prefers to be called, talking about benefits of activity, benefits of this whole exercise thing, other than looking really, really ridiculously good naked. And I don't think he understands our core segment. So we're trying to bring him on for, let's say, not the other side. You know how you have to have opposition guests to make it seem like you're fair. So we narrowly select people that basically still conform to our view, but it gives the illusion that they're really presenting another side. I think he blew the house down on this one, however, Ben House.
Yeah, Ben House did blow the house down on this one. Brought the house down, really did. So, no, it's awesome to have Ben back on. He's now a two-peat. This is the second time he's been on. The first time, he exposed the charlatans for the strategeries they use and how they get up in your business and make you think you need to buy things that you don't, or change your mind, or ignore the current science, and because you believe that it is, somehow part of the medical science industrial complex that just wants you to not know the best way to get lean, but hey, buy the strange extract. So he came on, educated us in that, and this time I think he talks about something that is also really, I would say it's not spoken in mainstream circles of fitness, or even I would say the medical practitioner who try to deal with the obesity epidemic, and that is looking at activity as something more than simply a way to increase the energy output side of it. When we're talking about, okay, how do we have long-term lifestyle change? And this ties into a lot of things we've talked about in the cult. I brought up that dear old J-shaped curve of activity and appetite and body weight regulation before. We go into that here. We also talk about the constrained energy model from Ponser's research, and how people have become a little fatalistic with the idea of doing cardio or just general activity because, hey, your body's going to curb that output. Insert something that I read about the Hazda, and faulty conclusion. So we go into constrained energy model. We talk about satiety regulation. We talk about activity, and we talk about really how little of a net surplus is actually driving the obesity epidemic, and how little needs to be controlled, and then just how powerful exercise is for its metabolic effects. And I think obviously these may not be things that are the main reason you go to the gym every day. I know why you do. We do it for the same reason, to get the bicep veins and the big deadlifts, and then, not much else. But I think many cult listeners are personal trainers. Many also have families. And while they do pay attention to them to some degree, we're trying to talk you out of that to spend more time in the gym. But before you fully converted to being a true cult member who has eschewed your family, while you're talking to them, you can explain to them some of the benefits that you'll learn in this episode. I just think it's really interesting. And I think we need to get away from a too mathematical view of the energy in, energy out equation, because I think the energy balance regulation is a much more complex thing that actually goes on in the background for most people. And when it does go on in the foreground, as in controlled dieting, tracking macros, eating specific foods, following a meal plan, etc., that's when it often has a ticking time bomb on it. It's eventually going to fail. We know that even for competitive bodybuilding. Like, hey, we're not going to be in contest prep mode forever. So the same tools and regulators we use to get in shape or get really lean, or just in the general population to lose body weight, probably need to be different tools than how we live our lives long term if we hope to maintain weight loss and the health that comes from it.
Eric, well said, man. I also like that Ben House is cautiously optimistic. He's one of us where he's fighting against some of that nihilism, where one of the examples he gave is that he said, on average, the average, I think it was American, gains 0.5 kilos per year. So as he refers to like one Christmas, so you have 10 Christmases, that's like 10 pounds or 5 kilos. And then in some of the research, if you're more active or some of these protocols of moving around more, you might remain weight stable. And some people are kind of poo-pooing that once again. Like, what do you mean? Well, you didn't lose weight. It's like, yeah, but then you didn't gain that weight. And when you look at the health markers as you gradually increase that BMI and all those other things, how there could be deleterious consequences down the road. So even on the surface, things need to be interpreted a little bit deeper. And I think he does a good job of basically painting not a rosy picture, but one of maybe hope, optimism, and something maybe that if you're a trainer, you could frame your mindset a little bit better, even working with clients, because I'm sure you and myself have participated in that, where we're trying to affect a client's result short term without maybe considering the long term. So I think it's a fantastic conversation, especially as you said, everyone has a family. Okay. Yeah. We like to look ridiculously good naked, but there's more to lifting than that. All of us are eventually going to get also up there in their age. So I think this is a relevant conversation for yourself, your loved ones, and also your friends and family, and maybe also your clients.
Yeah, and it's especially relevant now where a lot of us have been sedentary for so long because of either COVID restrictions or lockdowns or even just COVID adjustments to now companies have gotten much more savvy at having you work from home, which is, pros and cons. The con might be that you just find yourself far less active. The step count has diminished for a lot of people. And I think we've talked about this before. We've had Gabriel Fundero on to talk about it. Mm-hmm. But, when you institute like dietary suggestions or dietary changes, even when you come at it with an evidence basis and you're doing it for all the right reasons, and you're really trying to safeguard someone's long-term outcomes, it's not a neutral suggestion. There is always a little bit of potential harm because especially if you don't know the person's background with their relationship with food, and we just know the high fail rate, unfortunately, of long-term weight loss. But I would put forth that within reasonable guidelines for exercise, it's a far more neutral to positive recommendation. And you don't have to be telling people, all right, it's time to do 1RM deadlifts with your eyes closed every day. Yes, of course, I understand that heavy lifting has risk. Any sport has risk. Exercise has risk, but so does being sedentary. So I think we have to look at it from the perspective of not everyone needs to be, smashing bars and crushing gains. But if we are in that position as a personal trainer, prescribing exercise, prescribing activity, and thinking about it differently than what's just simply optimal, but what's likely to result in long-term uptake of a daily or regular movement practice. What is someone going to enjoy? Maybe it's not lifting weights. Maybe it's intramural softball, whatever. But I think one of the best things we can do, and you'll understand why in this episode, is help people establish a enjoyable, regular movement practice that they incorporate into their lives.
Eric, it has been said that we only bring our friends or people that we enjoy on Iron Culture. Can you just address this minor controversy of what they say against us, and that we try and provide, anyone and everyone that is qualified an opportunity to appear on Iron Culture? It just so happens that it seems like we have recurring guests often. What would you say to that?
I would say the number of people we like is many. The number of people that reciprocate is few. So the repeated guests are just a representation of the most tolerant people in our industry who still have something worth saying. So I would say that I am honored that Dr. Ben House got that PhD in nutrition from the University of Austin at Texas, is back on because we don't annoy him too much, and he considers us something akin closer to friends than enemies. So I just feel fortunate. That's all I got to say, Omar.
Look, Ben, I consider you my dear friend, Ben House, of which they had the limited but amazing series, ran for 6-7 seasons. House, I think that was based upon your life story of Ben House of Bro Research, Ben House of the same podcast, the episode we had of Iron Culture, where you basically broke down why people get fooled essentially by the anecdote and the mechanism, which I genuinely think was one of our best episodes. So we are thankful to have you back. And I will just say for Eric that, we could get a lot of people. I'm not going to be as humble as him. We could get a lot of people because this is Iron Culture, okay? It goes Joe Rogan, whatever the other podcast is popular is, and then the cult.
Another 40, and then us right there.
Another 3,241, and then Iron Culture. So we're selective. It's like in Spinal Tap, Eric, where they went over and said, hey, it seems like your audience, Ben, like you used to fill out arenas, right? Masculinity in Crisis. There's 10,000 people in the arena. Then a year later, there's 5,000, now 2,000. And now, there's 300 or 400 maybe people in the audience. Do you think that your popularity is dwindling? and they respond, no, 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 no. The audience has become more selective. So you're part of the rarefied few. So it is a distinct honor to have you on, and it's honor to be on. So thank you, my dude, for being here.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that y'all are done with like, can I, as a guest, because I'm as a listener,
Yeah.
I actually turn to the next episode when the guest gets to talk, because that's when things start to get juicy.
Yeah.
And so,
Eric, do you have anything to say?
Amazing. I will say that works perfectly with the Spinal Tap reference, because you're showing that you're not only the 2-time guest of the Hair Club for Men, you're also a member. You get that Iron Culture is really about us bringing on great guests so that we can talk over them. So yeah, it's an honor for you to have us on.
I'm just gonna try to ask, better questions to receive potentially worse answers, and I'm just really excited, just excited to hear you talk while I'm here.
That's what we like to hear. So thank you for being back on. I'm sure you're thinking, why did I sit through all of the challenging classes and do all the hard work to get a PhD for this? But that's just the game you got to play if you want to make it in this harsh Iron Culture dominated world. So, in all seriousness, though, I really do echo what Omar said. I think the last time we had you on, you did an excellent expose, if you will, on how often people get bamboozled, hoodwinked, other funny words that I can't think of that sound like they're from the 50s when you trick people. And I'm really glad to have you back on. You pitched me this idea, and I was like, man, this is perfect. I've actually been thinking a lot about this lately. I've been writing about it in mass, and that is basically like, I mean, you all heard it. Exercise, it's pointless, right?
Yeah, this idea, this fatalism and this catastrophizing around exercise is honestly really interesting to see where it comes from. Because if we think back to our last episode where it was like more mechanistic and anecdotal hoodwinking, this is kind of the opposite. It's the media taking the applied literature and playing weird telephone and like choosing to take like, oh, wow, someone gained 1 pound on an exercise study where they only added aerobic exercise and they didn't control for anything else, because that's what science does. It's naturally reductionistic. And let's blow that out of proportion. And so I think we've had this originally started in like 2009. It was the first time that I saw it. You had the Times, the Washington Post. They kind of started this ideology that weight loss is, you can't get any kind of fat loss with exercise. And then in 2015, 2016, we had Pontzer's research, which is like the constrained energy model, which is, honestly, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, a ton, but really, 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 really interesting literature that I think has maybe dampened our thought process of like treadmills for tacos, and our ability to, because y'all were there. Like, we all grew up with the muscle fitness magazines where, I mean, how many flights of stairs does it take to walk? Like, how many flights of stairs for a cheeseburger? Like, I don't know, but I'm sure I could look back up and it'd be like, depends on how much bacon I had on a cheeseburger. But so I think that it's good that type of modeling has gotten poo-pooed a little bit, but on the flip side of that, I think we've swung the pendulum a little bit too far as exercise's inability to lose weight. And Eric and I have talked about this a lot, is that the argument seems to be how you interpret the applied literature and whether you interpret it positively or negatively. And I choose, as a fairly pessimistic person about our ability to, as humankind's ability to maneuver our way around complex multifactorial problems, I even choose to be quite optimistic about the applied literature when it comes to the exercise realm. I don't know how y'all feel about that.
Well, I'll tell you how I feel. I actually think that the more I learn about the broader exercise science field, the more optimistic I become about exercise, because I obviously came into it secondary to being a meathead. So I was a bodybuilder and a powerlifter, or a wannabe bodybuilder and powerlifter, before I was a trainer. So like, it all started very single-faceted and selfish for me as just a guy who wanted to get jacked and big, and then found that the benefits I got from it created a sense of altruism, and I wanted to do a service to others. But you can't help where you start. So for me, I was very much like, I'm going to ignore everything related to anything that is not hypertrophy and acute fat loss or gaining maximal strength. And now when I've started to try to look at, now that I've looked at the literature beyond just kind of those very, very singular focuses, it's like, oh shit, it does a lot of stuff. So I remember when these articles came out and when it was going around that exercise was pointless. And I thought, like, what a myopic view, where like there's an assumption that the only reason someone would be doing exercise in the first place is to lose weight, and that's the only benefit you can get from exercise, which is just not true. And the more I've read some of the more recent research, which just looks at some of the benefits, or I should say the independent effects of being sedentary versus being active, even in people who are muscular, even in people who are athletes, even in people who are training but are sedentary outside of that, it just really points to me that we shouldn't. It's a disservice to really kind of put this data in such a limited limelight like that. So no, I agree.
And even if you think about, even if you don't lose weight and you exercise and you stay the same exact weight, we have studies now like the Ross study from 2004. You can change your visceral adiposity. So maybe you change where that fat is even stored. And if we think about metabolic disease is when as it relates to adiposity, once you fill up those sub-Q stores and you get into visceral adiposity and ectopic fat, that's where the shitstorm starts. And it's in that and ectopic fat, they look to be, the last to fill, but the first to essentially to unfill, or to the first ones that we lose. So the positives for exercise are so multifactorial, even independent of anything moving on the scale. And that's why I think there's the only loss that I can see with exercise is the same loss with type 2 thinking about food, is just people get weird. Like they get super weird with their Fitbits. And we've all seen that. But to come back to your trial of jackness and you're wanting to, I think all of us, like we've gotten into this field. If you're listening to this episode, you've probably gotten in because you wanted to be, jacked and tan and do your laundry sometimes. And I think that's what the general population wants as well. And that's if you look at the people that seek obesity treatment, they're not really happy with these 10% weight loss, these 5% weight loss, because and we've talked about this before, and probably a fault of the feed and the gram is like they do have these expectations that they need to have a resting six pack to be healthy, and that's just absolutely that's just not true.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And Omar, we talked about this before, how actually getting people to take a second and not think about weight loss as a personal trainer. They come in and it's their only goal. It's their primary goal. It's their main focus. It's the part of themselves they look in the mirror and they don't like, even when they're highly successful in other areas. Because a lot of the times when someone can't afford personal training, they're financially successful at the very least. And that was always an interesting thing I found, as a young broke personal trainer working with people who were, far more competent than me at life, but I was more competent than them at, lifting weights, which, I think they actually had the better end of the stick at that point. Now that I look back on it.
No.
But no, I know, what am I talking about? Biceps, baby. So, I looked back at that and I remember just thinking, how can I help you bring what you have here into this other aspect? And I wasn't always successful, but Omar, you and I had a same tactic where we initially focused on just getting them to enjoy the process of training and getting those little level ups of being able to do another rep or another load and then a little bit more load and figuring out what they enjoyed and then letting kind of quote unquote weight loss happen. And that's something I think most personal trainers have consistently observed. And it's not always necessarily like the scale weight goes down. Sometimes we see, body recomposition, which we've talked about in Iron Culture, which is incredibly common, despite what people often say. and trying to get them hooked onto something so that they get a slightly more, as my homie Alberto Nunez would say, diversified happiness portfolio. So the only thing that they're not just purely hooked into, have I lost weight? Have I lost weight? But, do I feel better? Am I happier? Do I have a change in body composition? Am I stronger? All the things that come from fitness. And lo and behold, most of the time, I would say, there is some weight loss, or at least some body fat loss. So I remember just being very frustrated when this messaging first came out, because it flew in the face of what I thought was the most successful entry point with my clients. So I don't know about you, Omar.
So one, Eric, you're a hunk, and don't forget that. So don't downplay the role of the biceps in overall happiness. Yes, Alberto's right with the concept of diversified happiness. But I would say it was interesting to me, man, because I would often observe that sometimes some of the more successful clients were fundamentally unhappy, and that sometimes it manifests itself in this newfound desire of trying to achieve a specific aim. So in this case, weight loss. So they're trying to analyze, and we've spoken about this before, Ben. I'm sure you can relate. We've trained so many clients. You almost become a rent-a-friend, so you really get to understand some of their psychology and some of their desires and where they originate from. And so some of them, there was intense pressure to them thinking, okay, they're looking at like a Rubik's Cube of their life. What do I need to do to be I'm unhappy. I'm fundamentally unhappy. I have this marriage. I have this. I have that. I have this career. Like, as Eric would say, ostensibly, we should be happy. Like, I'm a neurosurgeon. Like, why? I'm the top of my field. Why am I? It's like, oh, I got to lose weight. But I think they then get it twisted where there's so much pressure put upon themselves by themselves that it almost shoots them in the foot, where they think like, okay, I got to do this. This is the thing I must do. And when you alleviate some of the pressure, and when you almost redirect their focus, and then they get that competence. When we talk about that competence model, where it's like, wait a second, I could be strong. I could be my joints don't hurt anymore. And some of these things, I think you have to reach a certain age or a certain point in your life where you take some of those small victories. You know what I mean? So when you're 40 or 50 or 60 years old, and so young guys are just like, hey, I want that six pack. They go from, being sedentary to moving around. And then they know, hey, my knee pain's kind of going away. Like, I'm moving around more. Hey, when I go to tie up my shoelace, I don't feel this intense, rush of blood to my face, when I'm doing it. And so they're starting to get these tiny W's, and it's like, okay, this is probably pretty good. And then when they start seeing those victories they weren't expecting, when they're conditioned, hey, focus on the journey, it's like, Omar, wait a second, I put on my belt. Holy shit, it's the next notch down. And so redirecting that focus for them to understand, okay, it's going to take a lot longer than they think, and all those other things, diversifying that happiness portfolio, at least from what I experienced, I think, same with you, Eric, increase their chance of success because the buy-in was there, the commitment, and then their overall relationship with training, which was beautiful to see. And I'm not saying it happened every single time. Like, I'm not trying to give this fairy tale like Eric, Rudy style, and they all won in the end. I'm like, not even close. But I noticed a better success rate and a longer lasting effects from some of that for sure.
Yeah, as a coach, I've been doing this. I was terrible as an 18-year-old personal trainer, like absolutely atrocious. Like look back at what I did and what I said. I'm just like, wow, that was terrible. But I think that one thing I did, I was like, my wife says that I should, what did I learn this week that I was doing poorly? That's what we maybe need more of on social media. What was I wrong about? And I think as I got better, like as my 19-year-old terrible self, who was really, really excited about people wanting to get jacked and was probably more excited than they were, right? And and future casting to a negative degree, like, oh my God, you're gonna look so here, let me buy you these shorts that are the exact size you want, like that type of stuff. Then I progressed to this like nihilistic state in my mid-20s where like people would come to me with these external goals, and I would kind of I didn't do this externally, but I think subconsciously I kind of made them feel less than, like, oh, why do you have that goal where you want to change your physique? And human beings are naturally, we want to do things to get a result. And Eric, we've talked about this, like when you're trying, we're naturally want to go for a goal, but then as we're going for that goal, focusing on the goal tends to give us less joy out of that thing. So whatever brought somebody to me, whatever brought them to the weight room, whatever brought them to this idea that they want to change the way that their body looks or feels, great. cool. I'm gonna take that in, and then as we go through this process, then we might move the goalposts a little bit. But I'm really, really careful in the beginning not to move those goalposts, because that just happens. Because long-term weight loss, really, really hard. It's difficult. Like, yeah, the first week, awesome. You feel great. Yeah. Talk to me on week 8 of a deficit when you're waking up 4 times at night. And if you've never been in a deficit for 8 weeks and you're waking up and you've never experienced that, please go do that right now if you're coaching people, so that you can have more empathy and maybe a little bit less authority in how you talk to other individuals. But I think from the exercise side, one thing that, if you think about Daniel Pink, like his idea of sales is like, are you leaving this person better off in the end? And if you are doing diets, if you're doing the diet thing, whatever it is, detox teas, I don't care what it is. If you're doing the diets without exercise, in my mind, you are unethical. Because the likelihood that they regain that weight is very high. We can debate how high, and that depends on the time domain. But if you have exercise in there, even aerobic exercise, unfortunately, quite unfortunately, even aerobic exercise can probably spare fat-free mass to a certain degree. So I always ask myself, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, is this person going to be better off? Are they going to have better behaviors? Even if they come back to the same body composition that they were, if they weigh 220, 3 years from now, they come back to 220, is it a more jacked 220? Is it a more functional 220? And now, as a 34-year-old, less bullish individual, I try to be, and maybe I got a long way to go. But I think that I'm finally doing a little bit better job at talking about the long term, but also leaving that short-term motivation and that feeling of like, man, I can take the world over in that first week.
I think that's really well said, and I 100% agree. And I think just because I know our audience, there are some who are not wise like us in our 30s. We have people in our 40s going, you guys are idiots. And I don't know why I still listen to this podcast. No, but in all seriousness, just kind of basically speaking to the listeners who are like us 10 years ago. I'm going to drop some science on you, because I think this will rock your world a little bit, because it would have rocked mine. So I remember when I first started tracking macros and I was able to control my body composition, quote unquote, and get into really, really good shape. And I found, the biggest thing that most people have, the problem is that they underreport and they don't know what their calorie intake is. And we've got robust data going all the way back to the 80s that individuals with obesity versus individuals who are leaner have on average, a big difference in how accurate they are with their awareness of nutrition. Now, as we often will say, snarkily, without actually proving much of a point, correlation is not causation. But there was always this underlying assumption, because it often came from the lean personal trainers, that your ability to have that laser eye reader scanner and just be able to gauge macros and track them, that's not only something that is more common among individuals with obesity, that's also why. They don't know, they don't have nutrition information, they don't track it, they don't have that skill set. And if they just had it, and if they could track macros, obesity is all about energy balance, right? It's a math problem at the societal level. As ridiculous as that sounds today in 2021, that was my mindset to some degree, maybe not always explicitly, when I was a younger man. And so part and parcel of what I did was teaching people how to track macros. Fortunately, I wasn't just completely unethical, because I did actually have them exercise, Ben. But I often did not set them up with long-term solutions to their nutrition. At least I did hopefully help them find exercise as a hobby that they enjoyed, though. But now today, fast forward, in the forthcoming mass issue, I reviewed a paper that found that weight loss maintainers, people who I believe in this study had lost an average of something like 40 pounds and kept it off for more than 5 years, were not better at tracking calories. They were not more accurate than leaner people. So they still had the same quote unquote problem. But how, and I say quote unquote because they've successfully lost weight. They're the few survivors. And guess what did not do it for them? It was not the fact that they had learned how to use MyFitnessPal better. Indeed, In another study analyzing this data, what had they done? An hour more of low-intensity activity every day compared to individuals with obesity who had not maintained weight loss. And almost an hour, I think a half an hour more per day on average, so probably not every day, of moderate to vigorous activity. So they're doing high intensity activity and more activity, and they were an hour less sedentary per day. So, yeah. And I think that's just a really important point. So we can't have this completely myopic view of exercise when we look at at least, again, correlates. The correlates with successful weight loss maintenance. The strongest one. So if you look at you guys have heard of the registry of weight loss. There's a number of them, but the largest registry that I'm aware of, if you look at the most recent kind of meta-analytic of the behaviors of people who've successfully lost weight and kept it off, I think about just under 30% of them track calories, which is a lot. Don't get me wrong. Like I could frame that a different way. Like, look, 30% of people who maintain lost weight track calories. You should probably consider that behavior, but let's compare that to just under 70% regularly exercise and are try to stay active. So I think when we really compare these from just like what do people do who are successful in weight loss maintenance and what are the things that are consistently found in weight loss maintainers, it's exercise, it's activity. So I think that flies in the face with the kind of far too short-term view of going, hey, we saw this study. On average, there wasn't weight loss despite the fact that they exercised. Therefore, exercise is pointless. It's not the right data to make that conclusion, right? So I think that's that might be a good way to start opening that can of worms. And then, Ben, I'll let you start picking worms out from there.
Yeah, I mean, you get into the weight loss maintenance literature on exercise, and it's only going to grow. Like we have a lot of randomized controlled trials that are going to come out. We had a recent 12-weeker where individuals lost 10% of their body, 8 to 10% of their body weight. And then this is the crazy. So we're starting to like the early 2000s, 2010s were all about like what's gonna induce weight loss, and then you had look ahead, and look ahead was like, okay, the weight loss part is easy. How do we keep this going? And so now we're gonna start to see a lot more weight loss maintenance type trials. And so this one was really cool, and that individuals 8 to 10% weight loss. Okay, great. We got the weight loss. Now what are we gonna do? And so they either had them meet with a dietitian for once a week for 12 weeks, and that was able to maintain weight loss, or no dietary intervention. All they had to do was show up and exercise 5 days a week. Equally worked. So that's the cool part, is like zero dietary intervention. And I think we're all of the same mind here, is like type 2 forever thinking about food, not attractive to me. Not attractive at all, especially now that I have a family. Like it's a pipe dream now. Like back when I was a single 28-year-old, like an 18-year-old, I was not single 28. Sorry, wifey. Single 18-year-old, and I had my spreadsheet. I can go back on my computer. Like I had spreadsheets. I had to share a fridge, and that's what pissed me off, because people would eat my meals that I had pre-portioned out, and life is different now. And so I don't think any of us are going to advocate for type 2 thinking about food forever. It's how little can we get that cognitive oversight? And one thing that I like to talk about is people think that we're doing a terrible job. Like they think that our type 1 system is doing a terrible job with food regulation. And I always like people to do math. And so I'll have them take out a calculator, and I'll be like, put 3,000 in there. And now divide that by 365. Maybe you do that right now. And people do it, and then they like show me their phones, and it's 8.2. And I'm like, that's the average amount of calories the normal person is consuming per day. And they're like, whoa. Like that's all we got to pick up. That's it. We got to pick up 8 calories. And so when I find it interesting in Pontzer's latest book.
So to be clear, Ben, just for the listener, you were calculating the average amount of weight loss per year in the US, and then seeing, okay, what's the surplus that people on average are in, right? Is that 8 calories?
The average weight gain is around a pound per year. And so most people, and this is debated, but most people probably have 30 Christmases on them. And honestly, like if you're a personal trainer, most of your clients they've amassed some financial wealth. They're probably 40 to 50, and they've also amassed some Christmases. And so like they've traded Christmases for wealth and not worrying about this. And that to me, so I always preface it like with I'm in a state of awe that we're not all 880 pounds running around on Wally wheelchairs into each other, because like the built food environment that we have right now is absolutely cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Like it's nuts. Like just go down a freezer aisle. Like you don't even have to go to a fast food restaurant. Just go down a freezer aisle and you can take all that stuff and put it in your microwave or your stove and just get gnarly. So the fact that we're only overeating on average by 8 calories per day is pretty amazing to me. And so when we have these, even if you think about like the e-mechanic study that just came out of the Pennington Research Institute, even the individuals that didn't lose weight, they still ate 150 more calories. So all we got to pick up is 8. And so the e-mechanic study was taking, most of these studies are in the aerobic exercise realm, and they're taking people who are sedentary, 5,000 to 6,000 steps, and they're adding some number of exercise, usually like 800 to 1,000 calories. They're usually 3 arms, and then there'll be some kind of 2,000 calorie arm. And what they find is in the free living ones is that the amount that they lose is way less than predicted. Usually on average 30 to 50% if you look at the group means. The individual variability is wild on these exercise studies, but the only thing they're doing is exercise and adding aerobic exercise to their life in a sedentary population. And so I took that to steps, and I think this is the beautiful thing in your one of your last mass articles is you get to this number of like 7,000 to 9,000, right? And so like all these aerobic, like the Midwest 2 study out of Kansas, like all of these studies, they're kind of taking sedentary Westerners and they're getting them to that, maybe that, if we think about that J-shaped curve, Mayer's J-shaped Bengal curve of energy, which you've talked about, the Bengalese workers, they're kind of pushing them towards that more regulated appetite state. And that I think is where the magic happens. Not getting someone from 6,000 to 20,000 steps, but getting someone from 5,000 to 9,000 steps. That is, I think, a big deal, not from a total energy expenditure standpoint, but from just an energy balance standpoint, from an energy regulation standpoint. And so I don't know if we're going to be able to turn around the obesity epidemic at the macro level. Like weight loss seems to be pretty hard to maintain long term. On the individual level, definitely possible, 100% possible. It's a multifactorial mass, just crazy problem of progress. But on the individual level, can we halt it? Can we stop the Christmases? And that's what I'm thinking in the back of my head. Because if we can stop the Christmases and we can get people a little bit more jacked, the effect size that we will have on metabolic disease risk is it's like mind blowing. And so that's where, us folks who are worried about our biceps and our traps, we kind of got to check ourselves a little bit, in that the effect size of some fairly small interventions here could be, on the population level, could be massive.
That's well said, and there's a lot of nuggets here. So for those who haven't listened to the cardio, all about cardio episode that Omar and I did back in the day, I talked about Herman Pontzer's research and the constrained energy model, and the J-shaped curve, looking at the Bengalese workers, and basically the take home is that when you're not out there tracking macros, one of the things that most heavily influences your energy intake and whether you end up in a surplus and maintenance is how active you are. So if individuals are sedentary, they on average eat like they're moderately active and subsequently end up with a body mass that actually results in them maintaining it most of the time, but maybe in that 8-calorie surplus. But that puts them into that obesity bracket because they start gaining the weight initially. However, even just getting moderate or light active or very active, you start to see this much better coupling. And there is a regulation of body mass much more effectively because people are just appropriately hungry, I should say. So it is true, what they say, and this is actually a feature, not a bug. If you look at the exercise is pointless camp, well, what happens when you exercise more? You just eat more. So it's pointless. You can't lose weight with it. That's great, because Yes, and also, like, why are you eating more? Right? It's not because you're sedentary and your satiety and hunger are dysregulated and you're at the whims of this kind of jacked up hormonal environment. You're eating more because your body is actually changing that, becoming regulated, and going, oh, you need more energy to support the level of activity you're at, and now you're weight neutral. Fantastic. And I would also put forth a little bit of additional science to say, like, hey, what if we don't even see that much weight loss? Would it be so bad? Well, I would put forth that the data on being sedentary is a little scary, in my opinion. And this is also even applicable to the biceps and traps boys and girls out there, in that if you look at the data on people who do train, who do a decent amount of moderate to vigorous physical activity, and if you look at the independent effects of being sedentary, they're still there. And that's even true in people who are not high in body fat. So they have a number of studies that's been replicated in different populations in different conditions, where you do what's called like a metabolic challenge meal. So they give you either a high fat or high carb or both at the same time meal, and they look at how quickly you're able to sequester that glucose and those triglycerides afterwards, out of the bloodstream. So basically, what's your acute metabolic health? So they can give you this challenge meal, and they've done this type of study multiple times where they have someone run on a treadmill pretty hard the night prior, and then they give them this big overload breakfast, right? And normally what you see in a free-living, non-sedentary population, if you give them the exercise the night before, you give them the challenge meal in the morning, there's a predictable rise and then fall as those nutrients get sequestered. However, if you give them a week of being sedentary, we're talking like 13, 14 hours a day of sitting on their butt, it doesn't happen, right? That they have a response as though the exercise did not occur the night before. And here's what's wild. This has been replicated in individuals who are a lower than 25 BMI, so individuals who are relatively lean. It's also been replicated in the state of an energy surplus, deficit, and maintenance. So it doesn't matter if you're actually not eating in a surplus. If you're at maintenance and you're relatively lean, if you're super sedentary, it's actually you're not getting some of the metabolic benefits of exercise. So simply just getting your activity levels higher can make a fundamental difference in the way you handle nutrients. And that's arguably could be independent of weight loss. Long term, maybe not, but weight loss is not the I would say mechanistically necessary component to this. That there is a benefit to having that quote unquote energy flux of taking in nutrients and using them for activity.
Yeah, you're just trying to scare the lifters with that a little bit. That's
always my goal. Yep.
Yeah.
Fearmongering is our most often used tactic at Iron Culture.
Yep.
Salience of outcomes. I mean, if you're only lifting and sedentary the majority of the day, yeah, I think those 3 studies out of Ed Coyle's lab at UT Austin, they're pretty scary to you. Like those 3 recent studies where like you don't even get the metabolic benefit of exercise, like, whoa, that's crazy. And then I would piggyback that off the Ross study in 2004, where they had individuals lose weight, and then with diet or exercise, and then they had a group that didn't lose weight, and they all lost about 6 kilos. And this is absolutely beautiful study. If you haven't read this study, it's amazing. And the group that just exercised and then ate 500 calories more, like they didn't have extreme metabolic benefits, right? But this is one of the reasons this study is my favorite, is because they took the lab work 4 days after. Like most of these studies, like if you think about the Longland paper, where the most famous recomp paper that we have, where they gained about 3 pounds of muscle and lost 12 pounds of fat in 4 weeks. They took the metabolic labs the day after, so they're still in an energy deficit. And this is one of the coolest things to me, because this is one of the only studies that I've found where they waited and they kind of went back up to energy maintenance. And what they found was the only group that got the metabolic benefit was the group that got their weight loss through only exercise. That's the only one that changed their baseline metabolic health. The other two groups didn't change their baseline metabolic health, and so that's one of the, if we're moving the goalpost of this to how can we arrest metabolic healthy obesity, this term gets thrown around. The percent of obese individuals who are metabolically healthy just depends on your schematics or how you define metabolically healthy. But we know now that this state is likely transitory, but we don't have, like, for instance, if you're metabolically unhealthy and obese over a follow-up period of 10 to 20 years, your likelihood of type 2 diabetes is 900% increased. Whereas if you're metabolically healthy obese, it's about 400% increase. So there's still an increase there in your risk of chronic disease. But the studies that we don't have are, can we arrest this without weight loss? Like, can we just arrest this with more nutrient dense diet, with more exercise? And I think that we probably can. Because if you look at those metabolically healthy individuals who do have a lot of adipose tissue on their frame, they probably, and this is one of the, I'm going to throw this to Omar, like, as a trainer, how many times, like, I had ladies shake their triceps at me, like shake the, like, people just shake their subcutaneous adipose tissue, like guys, like I had guys like, they pinch their adipose tissue, like their subcutaneous. They'd be like, what are we going to do about this, bro? They just look like, what are we going to do about this subcutaneous adipose tissue? And I kind of want to respond now, like, nothing. Like, that's not the part that's going to get you.
Ben, this episode is probably the biggest W for powerlifters because it justifies every single action they've taken for the last several years, where, you know, they're like, I love me my THAC lads, where we kind of relabel things in the fitness industry, you know, where it's like, oh, like, movement kind of is the cure. Movement is a very good idea. And they're like, right, gotcha. Okay, so what's the minimal amount of stuff I can do and still be classified as someone that's an exercise enthusiast? All right, this barbell, I'm going to do 3 repetitions and call it a day. Oh, wait, once again, I'm tying up my shoelace and holy shit, I'm getting this blood rush going on. It don't matter. They're hearing this, Ben, and they're celebrating because everything that they've done, everything they'll do in the future, I'm getting some, at the very least, minor metabolic benefits. That's what I told you, okay? I told you guys this. So they call me a fat. I call myself, you know, I just have some extra love to give, and I'm actually metabolically healthy, so I don't have to do a damn thing. You're giving the W here, Ben.
Yeah, I'm gonna back it off a little bit.
You're gonna shout it. No, but
back it off a little bit.
I will say, but Ben, I will say very quickly, joking around here, I do support the movement. No pun intended. More recently, when I say to be more holistic, when one thinks about exercise, I saw a shout out to actually Alan Thrall, where he decided, you know, he basically, like a lot of us, it seems there is that relationship as we gain more weight. And I'm not just talking muscle, I mean just total weight. Our lifts increase. So it becomes attractive, right? Because then you don't have to track your calories and you have almost a reason to justify why you're gaining said weight. I think a lot of us get in that trap. I spoke with my buddy Mike about this. Just a lot of lifters, right? It's very common. But when you start really focusing on one singular aim to potentially the detriment of others, so just moving around a little bit more, the idea of, you know, taking steps or diversifying once again the things that you do, where it's not all tied. Your happiness when it comes to exercise is not tied just to the amount of weight you lift. Big things happen. Big things can take place. Something in the future, not now, because Ben, I want you to continue, man, is how to get this messaging to the most galvanized of the base, which I would say are exercise enthusiasts that are, let's say, the powerlifting boys and girls, or just lifters in general. Because when we tend to talk about this, I would say, Eric, I don't know if you feel the same, to the community, the benefits outside of just looking really good naked or putting pounds on the bar, it gets a little sticky, where the response, it's not that they're opposed to it, but it's not lucrative. It's not currently attractive. Like, I know when I talk about these things, or if I make a post versus, you know, once again, how to get bigger biceps, the response is markedly different. And sure, you could say that, well, you've built your career off of talking about biceps or about getting stronger. But it's like, these are other considerations, and they're almost novel in our space, because I would think because they're novel, they're not spoken about often enough. It's like, oh, that's a little bit of a different take. Let me listen to it. And it's more like, yeah, bro, I already know that. Like, yeah, okay, whatever. Okay, back to getting a stronger squat.
Yeah, what I do in that situation is I kind of neg them. Like, I'll pull a neg, and I'll be like, did you know that, like, even Olympic level unlimited body weight, like, if you're a dude, got a 70% chance of NAFLD. Like 70% in the unlimited body weight. Olympians, right? 70% chance of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Unlimited body weight for females, 95% chance of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Yeah.
And if you think about metabolically healthy obesity, one of the ways that we're starting to be able to determine that is your cardiorespiratory fitness. So, and this is where I think you can, like, we've all poked, like, maybe your uncle, your grandpa, maybe they got that power belly, and you're like, how does that thing there? It's just so rock hard. And if you got that power belly, that might be a little bit deleterious. So I'll use a saliency of outcomes, and not all, honestly, like, some people, they just want to, deadlift and leave a giant coffin. Like, and I'm not gonna who am I to tell you, like, if you want to, and I'm part of that group too. Like, I used to say, like, I wanted to go out. If I was gonna go out, I was gonna go out on a hard sack, on a deadlift, hopefully when I'm 75 to 80. And I still honestly, like, I still believe that. Like, I would be, if I go out that way, that's great. But I don't think you want to go out on a deadlift when you're 40. Like, that doesn't sound super cool to me. So the thing that I've kind of progressed, and obviously I'm not that old, is like, how long can I deadlift? And how long can I deadlift without pain? Because if I can't deadlift, I'm a grumpy SOB, and most other people don't want to be around me. So unless I want to be deadlifting in pain by myself infrequently, because
that sounds great.
Like, tracking my macros. And so that, I think a lot of, actually, I think Trexler was one of the first people that talked about this, the risk of insulin resistance in offensive and defensive linemen in the US. And we have studies out of Oklahoma State. We have studies out of the University of Tennessee. It's not zero. Like, it's 50 to 60% of these 19-year-old cats who are over 20% body fat are at risk for metabolic disease. So it is not zero. So
that's active. Like,
that's active.
Yeah, they're in the S&C room. They're running. That's a lot of training to be an NCAA athlete, and I think it's an unfortunate mark against the idea of that if you are with obesity, that you can also be metabolically healthy. It's certainly possible. I mean, 50% is great for the people who are in the other 50% category. But it's I would also put forth, though, that it's not a perfect comparison, because if you're a lineman, you're actually trying to eat to gain weight. You're enforcing a calorie surplus. So you are active. It's not like I started training as much as a NCAA athlete, and that's what's going to happen to me if I don't lose weight. What's more likely to happen is you train that much, and as we talked about before, you're probably going to get better energy coupling, and you might actually find that you're hanging around maintenance, and then you're in a different state than those NCAA athletes we talked about, who are probably in a surplus at least a good chunk of the time.
Yeah, I think that establishing, this is one of the things that actually boggles my mind in the literature when we look at metabolic health, is we're not really assessing, is this person in a deficit of calories, and we've had these are very recent studies that if you're not, the metabolic benefits of exercise are likely somewhat determined by being in a deficit, and so some of that is the driver, and I don't want to. We've kind of gotten to, like, the negatives of potential exercise and, like, how long, ironically, like, how long it lasts. I think that, and I think this is equally important, because though some individuals in the anti-diet world have said that you can become metabolically healthy just by exercising, and I think that you can transiently. Your baseline metabolic health is probably very tied to your body composition, and not just your body composition where you stored that fat. If you have overloaded that subcutaneous adipose tissue store, and now you are starting to store fat in vat and ectopic fat, that looks to be bad news bears. And Roy Taylor found this out in the UK, is if people with type 2 diabetes, if they lose that ectopic fat, they will, I mean, those who lost 15 kilos, 86% of them were in remission from type 2 diabetes. And that was from that loss of ectopic fat. And the research, another way to look at it is those who are metabolically healthy and obese, they look to even have a little bit of a buffer zone against weight gain still. So they have those metabolically healthy obese individuals gain weight and they still haven't overloaded their sub-Q stores and they're still metabolically healthy. Whereas if you overload a metabolically unhealthy population with more adipose tissue, they get more metabolically deranged. And that kind of gets into this personal fat threshold. But from an exercise transiently is only going to benefit that. But I think we have to be careful in our promise of what it can do and can't do. And for a power lifter, bring it back to the cult. I mean, if you have a hemoglobin A1C of under 5.7, and so this is something that myself and Dr. Tommy Wood have looked extensively at, is what is your risk of being metabolically healthy if you are overweight or obese and you lift? And I think the metrics that we have for males are around 22% body fat is when you could be more at risk. And females, it's way higher. Females are way better at storing adipose tissue than males, and it's probably 34. I mean, there's always going to be individuals that can go more than this. But those look to be, you can also do your waist to height ratio. This is, once you get above 0.5 on a waist to height, because then you're starting to store your fat centrally, then you could be getting in a little bit of trouble. What we don't know is, like, I mean, what's a little bit of trouble? What's a little bit of beaties worth to you? Like, I mean, legitimately, is it worth a little bit of beaties to deadlift 800 pounds? Who am I to tell you no?
Ben, they're not deadlifting 800 pounds though. The average call. So here, gents, this is my question for you though, because it is that consideration everyone has to make, I think, at a certain point in time. My question for both of you would be, when do you have to start thinking about this? Because let's be honest, let's assume the average lifter, they're lifting probably for either aesthetic or performance reasons. And I would venture to guess, at least when it comes to the male part of the cult, everyone's done, that their dirty bulk. Everyone's gone on probably that strength phase where they allow themselves to gain that extra weight. How is it a question of how long they would be in there? Because I would say if you're talking a real, like Eric, we're talking a real 22% body fat. When guys are like, I'm 13% body fat, I'm like, add 5% at least to that, and we're getting there. It's like I would put forth that the average lifter at least dances around that at some point in their lifting career for sure. And many people have chosen to stay there, and because once again they like it, the performance is going up. Is it a question of length for them, or is it a question of age? Where once again, hey, you're 22 years old, you're over 22% body fat, you're lifting, you're loving life, it's charming. You become 30, it's like, that becomes more concerning. 40, like what are some of the considerations for people listening? If we have to have that come to Jesus talk, boys, like what point, is it a length? Is it an amount where you said you're flirting with BDs at 22%? Or is it also age? Like, what are the key factors here to scare some folks? Scare them into walking just a little bit more.
I think it's worth actually just pointing out, like, what the hell does it even mean to be metabolically unhealthy? What are these markers we're talking about? HbA1c, blood triglycerides, blood glucose. Essentially, what we're talking about is when there is more food in your blood. Like, to really put it simply, like blood triglycerides, blood glucose levels, that's just saying like there is a surplus of nutrients that now there's more hanging around in your blood, and that has negative effects on your health. But the actual, like, the way we diagnose this stuff is just, is it there? We don't diagnose diabetes based on, have you actually had then subsequent negative health consequences from it? Have you had to have your foot amputated does not dictate whether you have diabetes, right? I mean, not to get morbid, but there are serious consequences. It is just based on, what are your blood levels at? And it doesn't even necessarily diagnose whether, we know it is the case that there is something going wrong with your insulin signaling to get there. But we don't necessarily know to what degree has that progressed. Some people with type 2 diabetes are injecting insulin. Some people are not. There is different stages of this. There's different effects. It could be, like you said, like if you don't measure someone in consistent conditions, you can get very different measurements on these. So it's very transient that we can see changes in blood glucose and blood triglycerides in normal free-living environment. The question is, how long has it been there, right? And how well can you sequester it? And then is it doing subsequent damage? And is that nutrient surplus constantly actually starting to cause issues to your metabolic organs, right? And that's really what we're talking about. So I think that I like to say that to people because it's helpful to understand, because they tend to start looking at, metabolic health or healthy, unhealthy, or diabetes, no diabetes is like these on or off things, when it is actually relatively transient, especially in early stages. And that's why it's important to consider that whole surplus deficit maintenance and whether or not you have the right kind of fat storage to where that surplus can go somewhere and it's not a problem before you start filling up, that visceral fat. So I think that's worth saying, in that, like, it's not a big deal if for months you have high blood glucose levels, like in and of itself. And if you were to then come out of a surplus and, be at maintenance for a while, that came with a little bit of body fat loss, it would probably like that never happened, So I do think we are talking about a time in condition, and then the subsequent effect on organs is really what we're talking about here. Ben, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Two things. A lot of this exercise literature is probably trying to prevent diabetic foot ulcer pictures on Cheetos and Coca-Cola. Like that, we also have to, a lot of this research is probably trying to move the needle away from the obesogenic food environment. That's one thing that I think is important to mention, because and then the other thing, when we get into this transient nature of metabolic health, is, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Eric, is all of these are lines in the sand. Like, are you diabetic today and then non-diabetic tomorrow? 126 on a fasting milligrams per deciliter, right? And one thing that I'll always explain to people is, like, have you ever caramelized onions in a pan? And they're like, if they have a frying pan, they probably have caramelized onions. If they don't have, if they're a college student, I may not ask that question, but I'll ask them if they've overcooked their Hot Pocket. And if you've overcooked your Hot Pocket, you have some caramelization on there, and that caramelization is a glycation reaction. And so when you go over 160, 180 milligrams per deciliter of blood glucose, and how much glucose is that for the kids? Your fasting level in your blood is about 4 grams of glucose. So 4 paper clips, 4 teaspoons of sugar in 5 liters of blood. And so your body is generally keeping that in a 4 to 8 gram window, right? And if you think about an oral glucose tolerance test, which is 75 grams of glucose to the face, just chalky liquid to the face, even a diabetic is dissipating 70 grams of that, about over, like, it's very, very complicated. It goes we don't have time. It goes all different places. But even someone who's metabolically fairly deranged, they're still dissipating a ton of glucose. And so we actually have data on metabolically, like, just jacked and tan individuals, and eating 500 grams of carbohydrate. So one thing I don't want to induce is fear in lifters who are metabolically healthy, because we have CGM data that eat it in the face of 500 grams of, not like, this is like white rice cakes. Like, this isn't like quinoa and kale salads.
And CGM, folks, constant glucose monitoring. Go ahead.
Continuous glucose monitoring, which gets plugged into your tricep, and normally for type 1 diabetics, type 2 diabetics. But you're starting to see this literature come a lot more, because these things are not as costly. But if you are metabolically healthy and you are lifting, you can stay within a 1 to 2 gram window in the face of 500 grams of carbohydrates. And this is like glycemic variability. So if someone is, and you don't want to major in the minors here, and I would, if you have a good body composition and you are not, and you're moving, the odds that you are metabolically healthy are through the roof. Like, it's just really, really high. And then if you are somewhat worried about your metabolic health, right? Because if you're caramelizing onions in a pan, if you're caramelizing your blood cells, you're caramelizing your retinas, you're caramelizing your neurons. That's called a retinopathy, a neuropathy. Like you're talking about type 3 diabetes and dementia risk. So like these things have consequences. And chronic disease, the common denominator is always time. So it's how long. I mean, we talk about anabolics, like it's time and duration, right? It's dose and duration. Same thing with these, like to make a weird analogy, same thing with these chronic diseases, like high lipids, high blood glucose, high inflammation over time. We know exercise can diminish all of those with or without weight loss. Exercise transiently can knock down all of those. And we have the coolest study of them all, the cruise study. The cruise study took type 2 diabetics and put them on a circuit training program. I'm serious. Like if you've never read a study, read the cruise study. It's in the journal Strength and Conditioning Research. And what they did was they took type 2 diabetics and they put them on a high rep circuit training. These cats were non-diabetic for 24 hours by doing a high rep circuit training. But the 8 rep, so that was like a 16 rep max program with short rest intervals. Like they're doing 16 RMs on a circuit training versus doing 8 RMs on a circuit training. It looked like this high volume circuit training was way better at bringing people down on as far as like metabolic health. So if you're a power lifter and you're a little bit worried, maybe you run a metabolic block. I don't know. That's all I got.
Just to deplete some glycogen stores, baby.
They just heard from you. Ben's advocating for CrossFit. His credibility. It was like, yeah, I'm following you. I'm following you. I'm following. Oh. Now, I do think the question then becomes how to communicate this to perhaps your loved ones or other people. The concept that, you know, the benefits, the real tangible benefits of movement, or the things that you could do that are more likely to produce results. Like Eric, as you were joking, kind of. Before, kind of in the fitness community, it's like, what if I was to tell you that if you track macros, then you could know how much you eat, and then you could change how much you eat in order to lose weight? And someone who's overweight, it's like, I know I eat too much. Like when I put in the macros, then it's going to tell me like I'm eating too much. That's not the issue here. I know I'm eating too much. This is how I got here in the first place. So I think the concept of messaging to the outsider or to someone that is now not part of the cult is something interesting to consider, because I think at the very least in the community, it's like, yeah, movement, good, got it. Like, hey, if I'm taking away something, good. So, okay, my set's at 3. Maybe should I do something in addition to that? I don't know about that. I'll consider, okay? Like being over a certain body fat threshold, cool, Ben, I'll consider it. But for the general population, because I think all of us, and I think that was one of my major reasons the commitment to be a lifelong lifter was through training clients and just seeing down the road, if you don't continue in some fashion, I'm not saying barbell movements, but just let's call it movement in general, some sort of exercise, the very deleterious effects that are real. And so I used to joke on the YouTube channel, I framed it in a way like some of the kids like found funny, and it's like, oh yeah, like it's like I want to be that jacked grandfather, you know, at the swings, taking my grandchildren, looking good. I frame it as looking good, like represent, like basically able to still do the things that I enjoy. So that was one of the reasons I'm like, yep, I'm a lifelong lifter. How do you start then communicating some of these very real tangible benefits, Ben and Eric, to non-lifting enthusiasts? Just like, hey, like, you know, of course we want to go over nutrition. It's very important. Some of those things is like, but if we could just get you moving, like if we could kind of have you do something to start, that's a win. Like we could, that's a global win. So what does that look like to change maybe someone being sedentary, which is another, we talk about the obesity epidemic. We talk about all these things. That's one of the key issues right here, getting people to move more.
That's actually extremely argued right now. That's one of the crazy parts that's argued right now, is whether sedentary behavior, and this comes down to that energy expenditure argument. And I think it's failing to realize the appetite regulation part of activity. And so what I would, if like, I'll use 2 things in that situation, Omar. I would use salience of outcomes, and like, you want to break a hip and have a 50% chance of dying. It's like, you're going to like, once you're after the age of 50, if you don't use it, you lose it. And your strength and your power and your muscle mass is going to go down. Also, your activity levels overall, if you don't watch it as you age, go down, and you lose muscle mass and you lose functionality. Is that inevitable? Absolutely not. you can gain muscle mass and you can retain it. And I think the craziest study that Eric and Greg talked about at the beginning of the pandemic was the study where they found like how little you actually need to maintain the amount of muscle that you have. So I'll use saliency of outcomes, and then for the general population, I'll lower the bar. Because right now they think the bar is they have to live at the gym, and they don't. Like they might be able to train for, 6, 10, 12 weeks, put on some muscle, and then maintain that muscle by training what, Eric, once, twice a week, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, we saw that there's a study by PAC. Shout out Andrew Lakis out there. He's doing his PhD on the minimum effective dose with James Steele, and I've had the opportunity to collaborate with him a little bit. Trained national level Greek powerlifters making gains, working up to a single on a 2-3-1 frequency, 2 squat singles, 3 bench singles, 1 deadlift single, and they're getting stronger. So the minimum effective dose for even trained lifters to get stronger or bigger is quite low. So I would 100% agree with you, Ben.
Yeah, it boggled my mind in that one of the things that I've been asking, because I in the fitness place, I don't know that we mind the gap enough. Like we have this lifting and nutrition, it's all integrated into our identities, right? Whereas the general population, it's not integrated into who they are. Right. And so that can take time. And like, I think we talked about in the beginning, like them falling in love with the process. Right. But even if they don't fall in love with the process, what's the minimum that they can do and still get, if they're very, like, you see this with computer programmers or with people who are very, very, like, just really, really smart people, like, what's the least amount that I can do and get the massive amounts of benefits? And it's really, really low. Like it's probably 7 to 9. And like, I think this, like, it's really humbling. And that's the thing that I've learned over the last 5 years is like, wow, the amount that people need to maintain their level of muscle mass. And if you look at like all-cause, we've had a bunch of stuff come out about all-cause mortality and muscle lately. It's been really, really popular. The FMI breakpoint, like if you want a fat-free mass index breakpoint, looks to be about 17 for dudes. Like that's low. Like I'm just telling you, like that, like you can plug your numbers in. If a fat-free mass index number doesn't, if you don't know what that means intuitively, it's how much muscle you have on your frame. But a 17 is fairly low. Like Eric, you're probably 24, 25. Omar, same thing. I'm probably, just to give you all, just so people don't hate me on the call, I'm probably a little bit lower than that. But the breakpoint for females is probably 14. From all-cause mortality standpoint, I think you want to give yourself some buffer room there. I think you want to give yourself a little bit of room to work with. So I would say like a 19. If you got, so this is usable stuff that you can use. These come out on Monday, so you can use it on a Tuesday. Is that from a male perspective? If someone's over a 19 on a fat-free mass index and you have, doesn't even have to be super good body comp data on them, then they're probably free and clear as far as like muscle's ability to, from an all-cause mortality standpoint, and females probably around 16 to 17. And the cool thing is these are attainable and maintainable numbers throughout the life course. And that's what I've learned is like just mining this gap, and like people that don't necessarily like the gym, or maybe they like Planet Fitness. How can we make this a little bit more, just a little bit less crazy for them? Yeah.
Now, to be clear, you don't have to respect them if they only have a 19 FFMI. But it is, yeah. I mean, if you don't start with a 2, you don't exist in my world. But but it will still give them that sarcopenia buffer that Ben is referring to. But in all seriousness, I'm totally kidding. Like that was a huge lesson for me as a young personal trainer, was just to help someone find a movement practice, and I had to get away from the idea that it needed to be lifting. Certainly something that requires some high force muscle exertion, and that's a relative statement. I don't mean like strength training necessarily. Something that does challenge your skeletal muscle is good, because you're probably not going to get to that 19, if that's not there, just doing aerobic exercise, and then falling in love with it, enjoying it, or at least doing it regularly. That's like best case scenario. And then I think like second best case scenario is, all right, well, what's the minimum I can get you to do? And this is going to become like brushing your teeth, or like, something that is, you just incorporate it into your life. You don't necessarily like it, but it's your ticket to living into your 80s kind of deal. So I totally agree with Ben. And I think, I think it really pays to, even if you totally just love one form of lifting, like you're a power lifter or you're a bodybuilder, or you're a weightlifter or whatever, to really try to get exposure to multiple outlets, to your clients. I think it's easy to go like, oh, look at this bullshit. Like all these guys, they got them on a Bosu ball today. They got them doing bands tomorrow. It's terrible. But like none of us can deny that weightlifting and powerlifting have exploded because of CrossFit. And that is a direct result of people going to CrossFit and getting to go to the buffet of exercise and going, no, I don't like this. I like this. I'm going to get out of here. There's people who I'm sure that they've done the same, but gone to running 5Ks or something like that. So don't do your clients the disservice of making them little clones of you and only getting exposed to the same exercise that you do. I would say encourage them to try out a ton of different ways of moving, because they might just hit something that really speaks to them. Because most of us get a very limited exposure to what's out there. Especially in the U.S. where physical education is kind of dead, where we don't like, man, I very much envy the children here in New Zealand. And when they go to school, they get like true physical education, and they get exposed to all kinds of different sports, activities, exercises, outdoor, indoor, the whole 9 yards. And it's probably no wonder that there's such a high level of sport participation in this society. I don't know what the chicken or the egg is, but I will say it's very difficult to know if you like something if you never get to do it. That's pretty intuitive. So yeah, I'd say first line ordered solution that I would give Omar is try a bunch of different stuff, and don't try stuff based on the potential efficacy that it could have for your health or fitness. Try it based on what do you think you might like: intramural soccer, swimming, adventure hiking, stuff that doesn't even look like exercise. Spartan race, there you go. The zombie things with the where you're running from the zombies and you shoot them with the guns, and it's great. Whatever. Like it doesn't even have to look like exercise on the outside. Like my wife, she is doing her master's in geology, and she's also part of the Auckland Geological Society. That's not an exercise group, but they regularly get together and climb around rocks. It might as well be a hiking group as far as what your body is experiencing. So, I mean, anything like that is really, really important. And just to go back to what Ben was saying about how the threshold to being quote unquote active and starting to get some of these benefits is a lot lower than people think. Getting to 7,000 steps, which based on the limited data we have from different angles kind of indicates that's when you start to not see associations with all-cause mortality. That's when you start to see improvements in health, and that's when you start to see those challenge tests getting better, because they've done these those studies I mentioned earlier based on how long were you sedentary before and then doing exercise. They've also done them on how many steps did you do, and getting from like that 4,000 to 8,000 step is the difference in one study I'm particularly thinking of, to where all of a sudden they had that beneficial metabolic response to exercise. 7,000 steps is not that crazy. It really isn't. I have a desk job. I do shit like this all day, and I take a walk in the morning, and then I exercise once a day. Well, not every day. I have a couple days off, but that gets me there. And I do a few other things where I simply think about, all right, some basic rules I have. I take one of the first spots in the parking lot that I see. I don't try to get closer. If I'm late, different story, but try not to be late. If there's elevators or stairs, I take the stairs. When anytime there's something within distance that I can walk to get versus drive, I walk. So implementing some of those rules that are more just about your daily living activities rather than exercise, plus taking basically two bouts of something, doesn't need to be exercise, and you're there. So a morning walk, an evening walk after dinner with your family, you're good. and then some type of regular movement practice that ideally would get you some muscular stimulation. And I think you're there. And that's a much lower bar than most people think that they need to achieve, which I totally agree with Ben on.
Boys, you're done doing it. I do want to say something quickly. I do wish in our space that we had more communicators for the general population, basically to get them into exercise. So people that are trying to convey this information, where we're kind of in a rarefied space. You know, if someone already has discovered one of us, very likely they're already kind of into exercise, at least on the periphery. Maybe they've done a bit of it, maybe they're coming back to it, or maybe they've done another sport and now it's time. So maybe it's, like I used to be a football player. Like, it's not an uncommon story. Used to play football, yeah, man. I trained in the gym, and now I'm trying to just train because I enjoy training. That's like kind of the stories like, how did you find out about the channel, the podcast, or this or that? I had my brother did bodybuilding. There's not that window into the much larger view, which is general population. And I would put forth, I'd say, Eric, that when at Iron Culture we say united for all lifters, we mean not just those that are currently lifting, but every single person who can be a lifter. Because we poo-poo, I think in the community, that's where we joke about CrossFit or just doing, metabolic conditioning or a diversity of different movement that then you discover what you enjoy. I actually fondly remember my piano teacher who did a lot of, as you were joking, like intramural soccer. He was almost 60 years old. And this dude, when people say you play a sport, try lifting, see what's up. He had genuine quads. Like, he didn't train. All he did was play soccer, and within 8 weeks, he had never trained before. He was squatting almost 275, no belt, no knee sleeves or anything, at almost 60 years old, and he had bigger quads than a lot of the, let's say, recreational gym bros that were 60 at that, or like in that age category. So I'm like, there's very big benefits just towards movement in general that we're very pro kind of like barbell, let's say, around here, but it's not to the exclusion of anything else. I just think that's interesting. What you said about like your wife as an example, like that's hiking. That is exercise right there. That's really good for you.
She can also bench 70 kilos for reps, but just put it out there.
Yeah. Boom, on the bar. Here we go.
I'll tie this back into the exercise and fat loss, and I'll try to tie it back into that, because what Eric said is none of the studies that are looking at exercise and fat loss are doing that. None of them are doing that. All they're doing is adding a fairly low volume of aerobic exercise. Like, the general population doesn't see it as low volume of exercise, but it's an hour of aerobic exercise 3 to 5 days a week. That's all they're doing. They're not changing their energy intake. They're not changing their step counts. And so in that, if we think about the energy balance equation, I always think of a bubble, right? And that's not a big poke. It's just not a big poke. And still, just with those fairly pedestrian levels of exercise, there's individuals that in 10 months lose 10 kilos and gain 5 kilos of muscle. Like, you look at the individual responders, and it's wild. Some of these people just get massive results just from aerobic training. And then there's been some really, really good studies on why some people respond to just these aerobic exercise and why they don't respond from a weight loss standpoint. And this comes out of that e-mechanics study by Martins et al. And what they found, and this is my biggest takeaway from looking at all this research, is the compensators, if you will, the people that did not get fat loss from aerobic exercise, they had the belief that healthy behaviors could outdo unhealthy behaviors. That was one of the key things that they found in the behavior. And that's where I think we've failed in this world, is this ideology from the 90s and the early 2000s of this stairs for cheeseburgers and treadmills for tacos. That's where we failed people. And we need to get back to this message of like, exercise, yes, it can help you lose fat. It can help you gain muscle. It can also help you subconsciously regulate your appetite. And even those compensators, and Martins et al., even those compensators, they still lost in that 6-month period. They still lost 0.5 kilos. They didn't gain 0.5 kilos. They still lost 0.5 kilos. And in our current world, that's still a massive win. And so just to tie that back in from the exercise is pointless for fat loss, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Not only did you just throw that out there, I think you just tied a beautiful bow on this discussion, Ben. Not that it has to end right now, but I think that was a great way to tie it all together. And if there is anything else you want to add, you can untie that bow if you'd like. But I thought that was a great point.
Yeah, I think the only other thing that, I mean, we're to the kind of the milestones where the hard, the hardcore folks are still listening. We've gone through the pleasantries, and I think that one of the things that I wanted to roll by Eric, because I really respect how your interpretation and your ability to think, and Omar too. You may not have the science base, you may not have the letters at your name, but I think you also have a really good way of thinking. Like you can, sometimes I think that benefits people when they haven't gone through the myopic PhD route, is they can think about problems in a different way. And so one of the like, so Ponser's literature, we had this constrained energy model came out, and it seems to have almost been taken to a fixed energy. Like, so the constrained energy model is that at a certain point, your energy expenditure is going to be blocked. And I've seen this with high level clients a lot. And so I think what we're arguing about with the constrained energy model is, where is the constraint? And then the other thing that we're arguing is, how long does it take for these adaptations to take place? And so we like, one thing that I've been mulling around in my head is like, Michael Phelps, yeah, he ate 10,000 calories. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But he can't do that forever. And we see that with the Tour de France, is like, you have their activity factors are 3, 5x. But I've had professional CrossFitters as clients, and I put in their macro, like I put in their energy expenditure, like what they should, and it's like 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 calories, but they're weight stable at 3,500, 4,000. And so one of the things that I've been toying with in my head is like, finding this upper level constraint of the buffer zone seems to be where the magic is from a coach client relationship. And I don't know what you found, either of y'all have found with that type of thinking.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point, because we talked about this a little bit before we were actually diving into and recording. But a lot of the modeling of the constrained energy model is really useful from a anthropological perspective, and maybe an epidemiological perspective, but I think more anthropological, because it's done on the Hadza. And that is one of the very few remaining hunter-gatherer societies that is left. And essentially, hunter-gatherers spend a lot of their life in a malnourished state. That's why they're hunter-gatherers. And that is not necessarily comparable to then say, well, okay, highly active CrossFitters, or let's say highly active people in a Western society, are necessary, or I should just say a society with a lot of food availability, are going to be the same way. They can be the same way, which I think we sometimes observe in people who are chronically trying to lose weight. I've definitely seen this in bodybuilders who are trying to maintain a lean body composition and also eat as much as they can because they're food focused, and they basically find themselves in this exercise addiction. Like, I'm doing 10,000 steps, working out 6 days a week, and I eat 2,800 calories, and that's good? Like, I don't think so, and that's someone my size, right? So I think that does happen, and it happens in our society most of the time in people who have an unhealthy relationship with their body or exercise or food or both. And I think that isn't necessarily the way it needs to be. And what I brought up was how you rarely will see some of the comparisons with post-agricultural societies and some of their data, like data on the Quakers, which has been done, which I wasn't even exposed to until I was in Costa Rica with you, Ben. And that was a really cool presentation. And we were looking at the energy expenditure and the step counts and the food intakes and the body compositions of Quaker men, and it's very different from the Hadza. They're walking around eating 4,500 calories at 10% body fat, and doing 20,000 steps per day. And even the women who, because that the gender roles are a little more enforced in those societies, they're still getting 10,000 steps per day. They're still above what we're talking about. They're just not necessarily like working the fields to the same degree. And they're also, reasonably lean and healthy. So I think that constrained energy model is really useful way of understanding kind of the limits of the way humans can adapt. That if you force them to move a lot and don't feed them sufficiently, that it does become constrained, but it's not necessarily representative of the way our modern society would be if we started to do more exercise. And so I think that's pretty interesting. And as far as how to actually leverage that as a coach, I think when you start talking about energy flux, the idea here, and based on the research you've already presented, Ben, you're probably going to have a much higher likelihood of success trying to just do more exercise. And if your energy intake goes up, great, and not necessarily trying to limit it, and then trying to make that exercise a permanent part of your life, because it will probably result in better maintenance long term, even if there is just that 0.5 kilograms of loss every 6 months. Because, hey, that's more than you were slowly gaining with that 8 calorie surplus, previously, and it'll only get better. So that's generally, I would agree with what you said, and that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people, maybe not a lot, maybe a lot is wrong. I think we tend to harp on negatives in our mind, right? But I so much appreciate what his research is, the conversation that has started. I so appreciate that. But I think you and I are of the same mind in that the Hods are low energy. They're low energy availability, like to the nines. We're talking about generations of low energy availability. Anthony Hackney out of UNC, if you don't know who that is, he's pretty much the godfather of physical activity and hormones. Like big deal dude. And he cites a lot of these hunter gatherers, the Ake out of the Amazon and the Hods out of Tanzania, as representational of the hypogonadal exercise-induced male. So when we're looking at cross-sectional samples of Westerners who are sedentary versus a low energy availability state, that's not answering the question of if you take someone who's sedentary in a Western environment and get them moving, that they are going to be constrained. And I don't think that, and so that's where I've kind of seen this argument go, is like exercise is pointless because you're not actually going to burn more calories because the Hadza don't burn more calories. And I think that's a jump that we can't make on the research that we have. And if anything, the applied research shows that, yes, we don't get the total daily energy expenditure bump that we think we would get, but we always generally get a bump on average from the means. Like it's not as, and that's because like just in general, humans are complex, right? If you look at the super controlled study that we have, it looks to be we pick up about 80% of what we would expect. And then if you get in free living, it's generally around 30 to 50% of what we expect. But I don't think that energy is constrained. Like where I get a little bit, I don't know, angry. I don't get angry, but just a little bit perturbed is like, you're telling Martha, who's getting 5,000 steps and not training, that she's gonna somehow be constrained in her energy expenditure, and it's not gonna give her more calories when she gets more activity. And yes, she might subconsciously eat her way out of it, but it's gonna give her more energy, and that might allow her to regulate her appetite. And so that's where I'm at. What I don't know, and I think the cool argument is that it looks like that constraint is about 2 on the activity factor. And this comes from like long-term like marathon training, and I don't it looks like we all get like an acute bump. Like, Omar, let's just talk this through as a story. Tomorrow, for some reason, you start doing CrossFit, like a lot of CrossFit. My
destiny was coming. Here it is.
like I'm talking like a lot of CrossFit, like too much CrossFit,
one class a day.
Just wadding out.
One class a month. It's too much CrossFit.
A wad a day.
Wad a day, because it's a wad by yourself because you're the only person that has access to the gym. So you're wadding out, and I think you're gonna get this transient rise in energy expenditure and the amount that you can eat. But what we don't know yet, and where I think this argument gets really cool, is like, We don't know how long. Like, I think your system's eventually going to adapt to that. And maybe you go up to like 3 or 4 BMR. And like what I've seen with people that have been doing any kind of training methodology for a long time is they kind of auto regulate to this like 2 to 2.5 ish on an activity factor. And so that's what's kind of cool to me is, and that honestly makes sense from a ton of different angles, but I don't know how you'll feel about that, Eric.
I would agree. If you're trying to do what feels like an unsustainable level of activity when you're not trying to progress towards an active goal, and you're not eating to match it, every signal you're going to be getting is going to be to try to find ways to be sedentary outside of it, or to or to eat more. Like those are the two options, and probably simultaneously. So, and like you said about kind of living in a type 1 or type 2 mentality with food, we know that if it requires above average normal levels of restraint for you, that it's just a ticking time clock of how long you're going to be doing that behavior. So really, it's not about math. It's about what can we do to make energy coupling work without that level of restraint, that's below that threshold where we know it's just set a timer and see when you fail.
That's a good point. I never thought about that. Like Omar might eat just mashed peanut butter pies for the first 2 months of wadding out, and then his appetite might regulate, and he might start eating more sweet potatoes and paleo and out.
Well,
absolutely.
Then I get I acquire a taste for those peanut butter cookies, and I decide I'm just going to eat more of them, and I just then we go super heavyweight CrossFitter. That's my destiny right there. I do think, Ben, there is one notable absence in our nuanced conversation of being sedentary and, all-cause mortality, and that is in the fitness space, if we can't understand something, we just neatly categorize it. And so we haven't spoken about willpower, just how this is a question of, one, complying. You know what to do. Why aren't you doing it? You're just not trying hard enough.
As it relates to exercise, a lot of these studies
all the problems in life, Ben. It could be anything.
Omar's just saying, like, look, why doesn't it work just to say you just need to, yeah, exactly. And because what I think, like the obesity epidemic that we've had, this rise in BMI, it is concurrently going with the wussification of society. That's my philosophy. Yeah. It's not actually a rise in rates of obesity. It's a rise in, it's a lowering in willpower because we've lost our way as a country, a nation, a people, and make willpower great again is what I'm basically saying. Right, Omar? Did I nail it?
You more than nailed it, and that's why, Ben, I'm sorry, you're on, so I will use this as an advert for our upcoming Masculinity in Crisis tour, where myself and Eric will be teaching men how to get hard again, and giving, live demonstrations, just everything necessary for people to understand what they need to do. I do want to hear, though, the response, Ben, because here's the thing, we're in a bubble within this space of the fitness industry. If you just like take a left down the street, that is like I am being uncharitable here, granted, for sure, but that's not an uncommon, as I think maybe as Eric said in this episode, subconscious belief that maybe they don't say, but implicitly it's something that they do hold to be true. And you said, Ben, about maybe if we all had just a little bit more empathy, so understanding of someone else, we would advance more as a society. How would you respond just to that line of thinking of people with, like, this is all great, like the data, the this, the that, the exercise, like we are, like basically, hey, Ben, okay, so you're telling me, bro, move around more, it's going to be healthy for us. We know this. We already know that. They're just not doing it. And why aren't they doing it? We're going back to willpower.
Lazy.
So how would you respond to that, man?
Personal responsibility, Omar. It's all of it doesn't have to do with society and culture and making cities more walkable. It is our personal responsibility to cognitively regulate all of this stuff. No, I'm being like, this is where we get into hashtag discipline and why none of us, I would love for this conversation to be on Joe Rogan, but I don't think we're disciplined enough to have that conversation. No, I think that we have to make all of these things easier. We have to make them, not only do we have to make them easier, we have to make them the norm. Like, we have to make them culturally normal. We have to make lifting culturally normal. We have to make it acceptable. We have to make it reinforced. And so that's where I go, is like this. I don't think we can expect everyone to have a walking treadmill. Like that, as much as I think that would be helpful in our current human zoo, I think that it would alleviate a lot of our problems. I don't think it's going to be happen. But what you can do is you can search walkability, obesity, and PubMed. And what you're going to see is cities with higher walkability generally have lower rates in weight gain over time. And I think as much as we love willpower in our field, for the average person, I think we have to make it as the least amount of willpower. It just has to be something that they do. I think, to get back to what Eric said, even parking your car farther away, that's a choice. How about we just don't have cars? Like, how about we just create, and so this is where you get into pipe dreams, and then you also get into hashtag personal freedom. So, and it's where these things it's this juxtaposition, right? Like this perseveration, because this avatar honestly, we're deep in this conversation. I'm just gonna fucking say it. Yeah. Our fitness space, we have an avatar who is obsessed with personal responsibility and then also hashtag freedom. And that, to me, is the antithesis of the obesity epidemic. It is so unhelpful for you to yell freedom and responsibility at someone who is in a food desert, disadvantaged, and doesn't have the autonomy, the competency, or the community to get better. Like, that is it's just atrocious, and I want no part of it. So there's my soapbox.
He started with basically saying, hey, here's why it's not helpful, but respect. And then he said, you know what? Kicked him in the chest, and then when he tried to get up, kicked sand in the eye of this avatar, the lifter. I'm going to go ahead and also come in and help you jump this person, this avatar, because I would put forth that the moment when I committed to becoming a lifter, it was not hard anymore. And the daily practices that I do and the way I live my life, it is not hard. It is something I enjoy. I often used to joke, because my clients, they'd look at me and go, man, you have so much discipline. And I say, no, this is this is my new video games. I am you're walking up to a 13-year-old playing Xbox for more hours than they should and skipping their homework and saying, you have so much discipline. I'm impressed with how, man, you're on the 8th level of Halo, 8 hours playing in a row. Wow. Slow clap. Because for me, I love lifting. It's part of my identity. It's who I am. And once I did at that point where I committed to this is who I'm going to be now, it no longer was hard. Now, that said, I think a lot of the leaders in our fitness space and who are kind of that avatar you talked about, Ben, they're athletes. And absolutely, when you are preparing for a specific competition, there are points when you have to leverage that ability to exert willpower. But the point is that an athletic competition, even an athletic career, is a known temporary time period that has seasons. It has an off season. It has a part where where injury rates are higher, training loads are higher, and you're accepting this. And it is absolutely not the same as how do we get people to live their life with a healthier body composition, which requires, by all data we can get our hands on and understanding of human mentality and psychology and physiology, requires needing not to focus on it. It requires needing it to happen in the background. So I would 100% agree. If you're out there and you felt a little triggered or personally attacked by what Ben or myself is saying, if you're speaking to athletes, it's all good. My company, 3D Muscle Journey, has dedication, desire, and discipline in the words. We are the avatar, but we know who our audience is, and we are specifically talking to people who are trying to diet down to an unhealthy level of body fat to then flex in a Speedo, the only true sport out there. And that is a very different message. And it needs to be, it should be. And it is a very different solution to people finding a way to be healthy for life. So I can only agree, Ben. I think the fitness space probably is a little too cross-talky across populations. People don't know their audiences that well. They kind of just see what gets likes, what gets clicks. And unfortunately, that happens not just in the content creator space, but also in the consumer space, where they look up to a bodybuilder and think, oh, they can help me because they know all about getting lean. When in reality, they're in a sport where they purposely go out and binge eat for 3 months after their competition, and that's considered normal. So they don't actually have the tools to help you maintain weight loss for a long time, most of the time.
Ben, I mean, I'm gonna go right out and say, boys, that Ben, I definitely actually agree with you in terms of what you said about that avatar, because I would put forth that a lot of the coaches we see have never trained the gen pop for an extended period of time, and it shows. Just because something is easy for you doesn't mean that it's easy for others, right? People acquire skills at a different rate. It's like the idea of music comes easy, diminished scale, cool, Phrygian. For you, you might hear the music and it might be completely foreign to you, and we could apply this across so many different spaces. So just to automatically assume that something that becomes natural for all of us, because hey, we're all lifting enthusiasts here, might be easy for someone else to do, doesn't make sense. I would say, and this is like probably not the most inflammatory thing I've said on the call. I've said some things, but I was actually surprised because I am privileged to be in a city like Toronto, which is very walkable. I've visited other cities. And one of them, I'll just say, like LA as an example, is not a walkable city at all. It's all freeways. When you talk about that very concept of getting out into your neighborhood, or either interact with or having a place to go, right? Like a destination you want to go. We talk about food deserts. There is nothing. It's just an expanse of freeways, right? So it's markedly different there than say let's say Toronto's like a grid city. I could walk from the east end to the west end, right? It's very easy. It's just like, hey, just go right down. There's parks.
We did. It was a wonderful walk, by the way.
Hey! I showed you a little bit around. That's one of the things I like to do, and I think people forget. That's why I have to give a shout out to someone, Jane Jacobs, who passed away. The Death and Life of Great American Cities. She was an urban studies, urban planning, all those things. She actually was one of the people that prevented a superhighway from being built in Manhattan. She saved Greenwich Village, amongst many other things, where there's all these people like these moguls, like like let's scrap Central Park, let's throw a highway up in there. Like no, that was one of the movements, and she was like, no, communities, like not everything's about economics. But we do forget some of these other variables outside of it, where we talk about the ability to play recreational soccer, to even have access to have people that want to play soccer with you, where you just sign up, like you just sign up here over try, you just sign up online, click, and it's like, oh, where's the nearest one? Oh, I could walk there, right? I have like 3 parks within a 30-minute distance. So I think some of those factors that, as you said, Ben, maybe sometimes not, science in general, but it has to be reductionistic in order to test for certain things, that we forget some of those other considerations, especially when we're in our own little bubble where it's like, yeah, man, we all like lifting. What, you don't like lifting? You're the weird one for not being dedicated for this, and it consuming your soul, and you getting mad when you don't hit a PR. Like, what are you talking? I'm the weird one? You're the weird one.
I always come back. So I taught at a high needs school. I taught high school algebra for a little while, just because I was in a gap year, and I think like this avatar that yells personal responsibility at people, I don't know that they've ever seen someone who's been disadvantaged. Like, and that's kind of the and so I just remember being an algebra teacher, and I would like super willpower, super disciplined, like, but I had a lot of, like, in my life, I had a lot of help. Like I had a lot of people bringing me up, right? And I just remember this kid, man, and he was just sleeping at his desk, and it's been like 4 days, and we're working on the slope of the line, and this kid is just always sleeping, and I just poked him. I didn't have many tools, right? I'm a 22-year-old. I'm straight out of college. I didn't have any of these tools. When we're talking about willpower, we're talking about how to talk to people, even about nutrition or exercise. I didn't have any of those tools yet. All I had was authority. All I had was like, hey, listen to me, I'm the teacher. And so I touched his shoulder, and I was like, hey, man, you got to pay attention. This stuff is slope of the line. We got a test on this in a week. And the kid, he's a sophomore in high school. He just looked up at me, no care in his eyes. He's like, I don't have a house. And like that was the moment for me. Like we talk about all these things and like these words, but that was the moment for me when I'm like, oh shit, none of this, all of this willpower stuff, none of it matters. At a, like yelling internal locus of control at that person, when they like, that person obviously needs more of an internal locus of control, but it's a kid. He doesn't have that ability, right? He needs help. And so I think a lot of us, we're not talking to 16-year-olds who come from disadvantaged homes. But when you're talking to a 35-year-old who's 30 pounds, 40 pounds, 50 pounds overweight, you're doing the same thing. When you yell that at them, it's this, when you just yell, try harder, this is what you have to do. You're using the same thing that I did as a 22-year-old. We got a test in a week. You got to take, you're gonna see a doctor in a year. You're using the same tactics. And I'm not saying those salience of outcomes can't work at some level. But I just don't think yelling at people to have an internal locus of control in an environment where they're not set up for success is overly helpful.
Yeah. A lot of the time we're looking at the difference between. So it is true, self-efficacy predicts success in a lot of these things, and that's the confusing part for people. But I don't people realize how self-efficacy manifests, and a lot of the time it manifests from having the opportunity to get a lot of accumulated wins and associate that with success, and not trying and failing over and over and over again, which is like the polar opposite. That degrades self-efficacy. So your opportunity as a trainer or a content creator is to try to set people up so that they can make that step and then succeed and then get that payoff, so that builds that self-efficacy engine. And that doesn't happen from looking at someone in a state of frustration who is currently failing and being like, you need self-efficacy. That just points out to them that they don't currently have it, which then degrades it. What you need to ask yourself in those situations, or when you get that knee-jerk itch to just kind of yell at people on social media, or sometimes in person, which I did as a personal trainer, is what can I do to set up this person or my audience, depending on who we're talking to put them in a better position to succeed so they have a chance to develop that self-efficacy. Because I can't just shove it down your throat. It doesn't work. All that does is point out that I have something you don't, then you suck, which further degrades it. And I think that is especially hard for people who build their self-identity around self-efficacy, because it's all about having the power to make changes. You feel you have agency, and you wish you had more agency to help others, but you don't. And that results in you then yelling self-efficacy at them. So it's this horrible kind of, self-fulfilling prophecy, where once that becomes your identity, you are actually less able to help others build it. So I think it requires self-awareness, and it requires the ability to step back into a space where you haven't been for a while, where you didn't like being, and that you no longer identify as, so that you can kind of get an angle on where people are at to help them. And I failed for years as a trainer, and I don't even like thinking about the way I used to be, but I think if I don't, I won't be better today. So
the only thing I want to add on top, Eric, I think well said, Eric and Ben, is that unfortunately, I think what happens on social media is a bit of that survivorship bias, where if you're yelling, so you're talking self-efficacy, and let's say there's 100 people. So I know this from the algorithm doing YouTube and everything else. Only about 50 or 60% of total views come from your subscribers. So you have just the Gen Pop, just random people viewing you all the time. So let's say you have this messaging, and there might be some people that identify with it out of the 100, maybe 10 of them, and they jump on board. So they go for, it's like, the major problem here is that your personal responsibility, you don't have that, you're letting yourself fail, like all that. And 10 of those people identify with that, and then they join you, and then they think that's the thing that works. So instead of thinking of it as like, and they get this positive reciprocal feedback where they're constantly seeing new people grow, it's like, well, clearly what I'm saying is working. It's like, is it working? Or you got 10 out of the 100 people, and now out of those other 100 people, out of the remaining 90 people, how many actually have had a negative association now with either exercise or the things you're talking about? We only see the winners, right? We only see the people that agree with you. So your base keeps growing, and it keeps filling in or feeding into the concept that what you're saying is right. Rather than the people, because to even have the autonomy to say, I'm going to speak up against this, like I don't disagree, and in a way that once again is actually communicating something, not just someone being a hater. It takes a lot of personal guts. So you're really only seeing always anyone in social media, those that really agree with you. So you think I'm talking about self-efficacy, and I could use that example. I've been doing this for 5-6 years. I'm talking about like the obesity epidemic, and people just need to try harder. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these individuals who have lost a massive amount of weight, espousing what I say to be true. So therefore it is true. The people that aren't doing it, so there's a confirmation bias, then what I'm saying is true. What the other people are failing because they're not listening to me. And so it just gets more and more dangerous. So I think, some of that self-awareness that hopefully comes with time, man, could be really insightful, I think, for all of us in the space.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be people that pull themselves out from their bootstraps. Like there's always gonna be those individuals, those outliers, and people love outliers. They love that. They love that. Unfortunately, as humans, we love that story, and we talked about that at the previous one. We love that. We're addicted to that story. And I always think about, like, so Eric was talking about agency and autonomy and self-efficacy. I always think about competency and resources. Like, can I give these individuals more resources to be successful, and can I give them competencies that allow them to be successful more over time? And I don't think we do enough of that. We yell agency at people, and we don't give them the resources to succeed, the communities to succeed. And I think that's what we need more of. And those, it's unfortunate that those stories just aren't as cool. It's like people doing it by themselves and overcoming, like Goggins' story. Like Goggins' story, like, you can't put it down, right? Like, that story is insane, and he motivates people. He honestly, like, I don't know if it's good or bad, because he creates internal locuses of control with his story. I can do this. I can make this happen. So I'm not saying that it's good or bad, but at the population level, I think that we need to be more empathetic, and then we need to focus on what is the not the fish in the I don't know, the fishbowl, but what is the environment, and that because eventually you're not gonna be able to swim upstream. So I absolutely agree, and the fitness space it's just a tough one over the last year and a half. I think it's just been I think all of us, it's been hard. I've definitely stayed in my lane just because it's kind of not worth going outside of it a little bit.
And it's hard to talk about activity and changing your lifestyle and things that probably cost money, or at least require you being able to leave your home when we're in a global pandemic, where that may not be true for so many people. So I think just to close this one off, the messaging is that to kind of bring it back, is that it doesn't require a whole hell of a lot of physical activity to make some really positive changes. It's not just about math. There's some regulation of appetite that goes on. And if you don't need to be super active. You just need to try to not be sedentary. And I think most people who listen to this podcast know that. This may not be specifically relevant to you, but you've got a family. You've got friends. Many of you are trainers. And I think, I hope that this discussion has given you some tools so that you can set people up to explore their self-efficacy, that you can give them resources and competency, as my colleague Dr. House just said, so that they can have the opportunity to therefore succeed. So I want to thank you, Ben, for being on. This is a great episode. And with that, Omar.
Ben, I have a feeling, an inkling, let's say, almost a premonition that we might have you on for another episode in the future, because it seems like they scream nepotism and we scream competence, that Ben is just that good, so we have him back on and on again. So I want to thank you. I'll make sure to link the social media in the description. Any relevant information also will be there on the YouTube. You can go ahead and leave a comment. If you're choosing now, you want to show your support, and you're like, hey, I enjoyed it, you could leave a rating and review on iTunes. We will go ahead and read those. If it's a 5-star, if it's anything else, well, it's up to our discretion, right? And we'll be back every single Monday from now until, you know.